Hello, this is Jed Brewer with Study Groups. It's very nice to have you on our webinar today. Uh, I am excited to talk about wholesale fuel and pricing and hedging strategies. Essentially, we have product in a tank in the ground. What do we do with it? How do we hedge it? How do we price it? How do we manage it? How do we bill it? So those are the topics that we're going to be talking about today. At SG Voices, we desire to be your go-to resource for connecting you with industry leaders, accessing trusted educational content, and discovering valuable insights that can drive the growth of your business. And our mission is to empower you with relevant and actionable knowledge. And really happy that we have two experts here on the call to help us talk about this topic that we're addressing today. First is David Thompson, and David is the Executive Vice President at Powerhouse, and Powerhouse does hedging for petroleum marketers in our industry and even in other industries that they work in. David is an expert on all things hedging, and he's really good about taking what can be a complex idea and making it really simple and actionable. So, David, we really look forward to what you have to talk about. And David's going to focus on why companies hedge and how they get started doing it. Then we're going to turn the conversation to Johnny Bertucci, who's president at RowLogic. RowLogic is a software company. They have multiple apps in the petroleum marketing industry and even in other industries too. Really strong on the data side with helping you make more informed knowledge about your petroleum products that you have out there. And Johnny's going to talk about consignment. What's the deal with consignment? So how do we grow our consigned fuel sales? How do we align our systems for seamless integrations? How do we notify? How do we bill with consignment? So that's a high level of what we're going to do today. Please make sure to take notes and enter your questions if you have it. We want this to be as educational as possible. So if you have questions, type in this system your question. I can read it and I'll relay it to David and Johnny at the appropriate time. Also, this webinar is going to be recorded, and we'll send out the slide decks of each of these presenters and the recording to you after this call, so you can view it again, share it with a colleague, etc. So with no further ado, let's jump on in. And David Thompson at Powerhouse, tell us a little bit about why companies hedge and how they get started.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jed. Thanks, Johnny. Glad to be with you again. And also very happy to talk with all the study groups members out there. We've had a wonderful time presenting to and meeting with study groups. It's always one of our favorite things to do because we love working with companies that are seeking to learn and grow and get better. And it's a privilege to have the opportunity to work with you however we may. And today we want to talk a little bit about why companies hedge and how they get started. And it really works very well with what Johnny's going to slide into as well, because we're going to talk about one of the most classic examples of hedging, and that is protecting inventory that we have in storage. One of the age-old questions that we deal with whenever we are meeting with companies, they'll talk about their situation and what they've got going on in the world and their business, and there invariably is one question: is there anything we can do to find a way to buy at a better price? How can we, start out and get a better price we can bring to customers and go after new business? And in our fuel world, there's a lot of things that change, but one of the solid rules that's always been around and probably always will be is that if you want to get a lower price on fuel, you usually have to buy more. Al Levine, who started a business, had a wonderful old saying. He said, "Them that have gets," meaning if you can ask for more fuel in a bigger order and a bigger slug of product, you can probably get yourself a better price to start with. And that's really the crux, the whole focus of what hedging is trying to do. Hedging is trying to manage risk and fluctuation in prices from hurting your bottom line. It's also trying to defend your profit margins. And it can get very complicated, but really the goal is to say, let's say you agree to take a bigger slug of product than you would normally take, and you want to protect it because you can't sell it all tomorrow. That's where hedging comes in. And that's the essence of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to trade to make money. We're trying to trade to hedge to protect ourselves, to protect that value that you just acquired. If you can buy a certain amount of product and you have a customer lined up to take it, then you buy it, you put your margin on it, your freight, any other incidental charges that you're going to apply, and you move it along. That's your job. That's what you do. That's a back-to-back type of a deal. Hedging comes into play if you say, I want to take a lot more product than just one back-to-back deal because I want to get a better price from my supplier. So that's what we're talking about. Hedging and speculating are two different things. When we're talking with companies, we are not going in the realm of speculating. Speculators are fine. They serve a purpose in the marketplace. But the companies we're dealing with, we are not speculating. We are not trading to try and make money. We are trying to trade to protect. We're trying to trade to offset risk. So we're looking at ways to stabilize business. We're looking to try and smooth out the volatility that often affects weekly and monthly numbers. Hedgers are different than speculators. Hedgers have a physical position, physical gallons, and they have a financial or paper position in correlation with it. Whereas speculators are just going out there and buying a futures contract because they think it's going to go up in value, or selling it because they think it's going to go down. Hedgers have a much different mindset and a whole different process when it comes to accounting for gains and losses. So let's get into, as I said, some of the things of why companies hedge. If you're listening, you have a business, it's been successful, you've been doing things a certain way. If you haven't ever hedged before, you might say, well, why do I want to look at this? I've been going along pretty well, and that's a compliment to you and your business. But the world is always out there and it's always competing. And this really, we found hedging is a wonderful tool to go in your toolbox of ways to improve your competition in the marketplace, the way to sometimes match what competitors are doing. Many times people will call us up and say, this company just showed up in my market and he's offering this deal and I need to know how to match it, or else I may have some risk to my customer base here. So that's a lot of these types of things, what we're looking to do with hedging and risk management. What we'll really focus on is number 2 on this list today, helping to protect the value of product in storage. It may also apply also to number 3 in terms of how does that product enter into your storage. You're shipping it one way or the other, either by pipeline, rail car, barge, something that is moving that product from the refiner into your terminal or into a terminal where you're utilizing storage. But either way, we're talking about product you have that you have not yet sold to a customer. That's the risk. And that's something where when we see how much the volatility in the market is in terms of price, in the old days, didn't move nearly as fast as it does now. So 8 cents, 9 cents, 10 cents in a day is something we see on a regularly and routine basis, and that is going to wipe out any profit margin you might have on wholesale product very quickly. In previous webinars, we've talked about some of the other points on this slide. If you have any questions about those, we can talk about those as well, ways to differentiate yourself from your competition. But let's focus right now today on protecting value of product in storage. This slide, I think, really tries to illustrate the point with a picture and something everybody's familiar with. Location matters in fuel pricing. The big arrow at the top is pointing to the big tanks, the terminal positions. And then down in the lower front, we have the rack where trucks are coming up. And when I try to say you can buy better here, meaning in a tank deal than in a rack deal, that's saying that if you went to your supplier and you just say, I'm pulling my truck and I need 7,500, 8,000 gallons, whatever my truck can hold, you're going to get one price. If you go to your supplier and say, I want to buy 420,000 gallons, you're going to get a much better price, a noticeably different price. So that's what I'm talking about, owning that fuel in the tank as opposed to simply going up and buying rack load by load. This is the advantage. This is why we hedge, is that we want to get that lower price as our starting point. But the challenge is you're taking more fuel than you can sell today or tomorrow. And you've got to find a way to protect that fuel in case prices drop. Otherwise, you just bought a whole bunch of fuel that is now out of the market, and that is not where you want to be. So that's what we're talking about. If I own that fuel in the tank, whether it's an in-tank transfer, whether it's product that's coming on a pipeline or a rail car, and I've agreed to the price and it's not yet here and I can't sell it yet. Whatever that might be, that product you own, you have title of it, it's your price risk, and it's not yet sold. That's what we're trying to hedge and protect. So how do we go about this? What we're talking about here is what in our world we call a classic short hedge, a short futures hedge. Very, very common in the inventory, in the industry, used by people who are protecting inventory in the tank. Any way you acquire that, we talked about, it could be in tank, it could be coming in on rail or a pipeline, a standard 3-day wrap on a pipeline is a very common way to buy. All these are things where fuel marketers have agreed to a price and want to protect it for that time period, that time in transit or that time in storage. Obviously, also used by crude oil and natural gas producers commonly. They're some of the bigger players in the crude and natural gas markets, obviously. So a common tool, very often used by companies. Most of your suppliers, if not all of them, are all that inventory they have that they haven't sold to you, be it a refiner or one of the big national wholesalers, they have that hedged. Let's walk through two slides. So just give you a little bit of an example of how the math works on things. Let's say that your company buys diesel and puts it in storage, and you set up with your futures account, you establish a short hedge. What does that mean? It means you bought physical fuel and you are selling a futures contract to protect it. And I'm going to use the example that it's August and you buy physical diesel at $2.35 a gallon, and you simultaneously sell a futures contract at $2.30 a gallon. That's the difference in basis between the cash market and the futures market. Let's fast forward the clock and say it's now November, and we look and see that there's been poor economic news. Global economic numbers have dropped off. There's sort of a slowdown going on. China's GDP isn't meeting expectations, whatever it might be. And we've seen that cash prices and future prices have both dropped 50 cents a gallon, down to 185 and 180 respectively. Remember, you bought that at 235 and you don't have it sold yet. So your inventory is now 50 cents worse off. However, as we see down on the column under the futures position, your short hedge, you sold it on paper at 230 a gallon, and you'll close out your hedge when the time comes to actually move the product to a customer by buying it back at the now lower price of $1.80 a gallon. So you've lost 50 cents in the value of the physical product, but you had an offsetting futures position that increased or gained by 50 cents. So your effective sales price is still at $2.35 a gallon. So that's a case where the protective hedge had a benefit on the future side to offset a loss on the physical gallons. Of course, it could actually, of course, go the other way. Here's the same setup. I just moved the slide, but I've changed the direction of the way the numbers are going to move. Here, with same deal on August 1st, you buy $2.35 a gallon. You establish your short hedge at $2.30. But let's say we have great economic numbers from the U.S. and prices are surging. Now diesel's up to $2.85 a gallon. Well, thankfully you bought it at $2.35. You're 50 cents better off than the cash markets are right now. Of course, you had a hedge on, so your gain is going to be offset by the hedge loss in this time over the same period of 50 cents a gallon. So as you can see, when we come down to the last lines in this slide, either way, you end up exactly where you started out, which is what we were trying to do in the first place. We're trying to protect the value of your product over a period of time before you can sell it. And the reason being
two comments or questions on that, David.
Certainly.
So you've got in this example, the futures position is moving the same, in this case 50% as local cash prices. Is that always the case, or can there be differences between those two movements?
There can be, and that was the last thing in parentheses right on my slide. I was saying there's a zero change in basis in this example. Sometimes the cash price, and oftentimes the cash price will move differently than the futures do. Sometimes up or down. Sometimes there'll be a slight tailwind. Sometimes there'll be a slight headwind. we're going to come up to another slide in a couple of seconds that shows that when you hedge on a regular and routine basis, sometimes the tailwinds and the headwinds tend to even out for you, especially over a seasonal period over the course of a year. So at times basis can help, basis can hurt the effectiveness of your hedge. But the real nut of all this is saying that 235 gallon price that I've indicated here, where you buy it initially, that's the advantage you're getting, because probably when you're taking a large amount of product, you can get 235, whereas somebody who's only pulling up his truck at the rack might be paying 237, 238, some higher number. And that's that competitive advantage we're trying to establish. The trade-off is you have to find some way to protect the gallons that you own over the course of time that it takes you to sell them. So that's really the standpoint.
And question on that, you find the price of the hedge, because there's a fee for the hedge, that tends
Correct.
to be smaller than the gap between the rack and in this case
Absolutely. The cost of hedging is measured in ticks, in the smallest increment size. So if as we know, I was saving space here, but we know diesel prices in four decimal points over. So if you're talking 235.25 for the gallon, hedging costs are in fractions of ticks of those last increments. So fractions, 1/100th of a penny in terms of hedging costs. So people ask, how does Powerhouse make money? We're brokers, we charge a commission, but we do an awful lot of business because companies do this on a regular, everyday, matter-of-fact program. Because they like the advantage they get by buying in larger quantities, getting a larger starting price, so to speak, and that's their advantage going forward. They just need to protect themselves during the course of doing so.
So one other thing about your example, I've seen people struggle with, like in your first one, prices went down and people are like, woohoo, I'm really glad I hedged, right? And then in your second example, prices went up and then they're like, man, if I had not hedged, I would be able to capture that, right? And they have a hard time saying, all right, I'm participating over the whole life cycle. Anything you can speak into that?
Well, it's just that sometimes you can have several months in a row of going down. And say it's one thing, well, we can ride it up and down. That's certainly an option. But when you go through a situation with COVID where the bottom falls out for 3-4 months at a time, sometimes the bankers start calling and saying, how much more you plan on drawing down the credit line here? These are, real world concerns that volatility sometimes can get very, very rough. And we're trying to, in essence, try to smooth that out so you can focus on the regular aspects of your business other than just the risk of prices going up or down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, taking risk out of the business is the goal. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, we're trying to increase profitability by starting out and acquiring product at a lower cost than our competitors who aren't taking as much product. That's the advantage. That's the starting point. Then the question is to say how to do that without assuming a whole lot more risk than I normally wanted. Normally, say, like you said, Jed, if your prices are moving quickly, if I can move through it and I don't have a lot of inventory that might be looking at a 10, 15, 20 cent downdraft, then the risk isn't all that great. But you're probably not getting much of a price advantage if you're only taking 42,000 gallons at a time. I mean, normally you're going to be talking in the 25,000 barrel type of range to start seeing a difference in price from your supplier. Mm-hmm. So let's take a look here of what the actual future statement looks like. This was from earlier this year. This was diesel. As you can see, looking at the date on the far left-hand column, the first three transactions you see of 5,000 barrels, 2,000 barrels, 1,000 barrels of May diesel were sales. Because at that point, the client was acquiring the physical fuel, 8,000 barrels of diesel, and they were selling futures contracts to protect it. And those you're seeing in those early trade dates. And then subsequently, they started buying back positions. Why were they buying futures contracts? They were closing out their short hedges incrementally day by day. On the 3rd, the 8th, the 10th, the 14th, and the 29th, they did some more. So this is exactly sort of back to that picture of the rack and the tanks. is that, if a truck holds 7,500 gallons, give or take, and these are 8,000 barrels, so 336,000 gallons. That's that difference. If you're buying 336,000 gallons in a slug, you're going to be getting a better price than 7,500 gallons as your truck pulls under a rack. But this is sort of the very standard way. As you look and see at those sales prices of the earlier transactions from the 28th, the 31st, the sales, the hedge sales were done at 224, 227. And then later on, as the course of the month progressed, prices fell and they were closing out those short hedges at lower prices, such that at the end of this cycle of moving through these 8,000 barrels, they had a $43,251.60 hedge gain on product that was declining in value over the time they were holding it. So that allowed them to protect their margin to the tune of $43,000. Let's take another look, as I said, at somebody who's doing something on a regular routine basis. This is a client that does both diesel and gasoline. They started out up in the upper section early in May. They acquired 25,000 barrels of diesel on May 15th. They sold their futures to protect it at $2.16 a gallon. They moved a couple of barrels through their later part of the month, and they moved most of it at the end of the month and closed out buying it back lower. They had a hedge gain on their diesel. As you move back into further down on the statement and see the gasoline side there, same thing. Their initial transactions are always sales because they're acquiring the physical gallons, getting short the paper against it. And then they buy back the paper as they move the physical gallons and they take off their risk. But as you can see, it's a continuous cycle throughout the month as they're shipping on pipelines. These 21, 14, 10 you see in the sales of the gasoline in the latter part of April, those are amalgamations of different pipeline shipments that they were doing. So they might have a 7,000 barrel day one of a 3-day wrap, plus another 10,000 barrel shipment and a 4,000 barrel shipment that were all coming on that one day on April 21st. That's why they sold 21 contracts. The next day is slightly different. So it's always on this continual cycle as they're shipping on a pipeline. They're getting short as the product arrives and they move it out and sell it to C stores or their own stores. They would be buying back their positions. And with the gasoline, you can see at the end of the month, they had a hedge loss because, again, you can see the inverse relationship. The gasoline, their initial sales were at 205 and change. And by the end of the month, they were buying back those contracts at 214, almost 215 in some cases. So we know from that the price of wholesale gasoline and at the rack was going up over the course of that last part of April and through May. So their buys on the physical were great and they were selling it much higher than expected prices because prices rose, but they had the offsetting hedge loss. But they were protecting that advantage they got from taking so much product through the pipeline as opposed to just running up their trucks under the rack each time they needed to every day. And as you can see at the end of the month, in the buy and sell columns, they both end up at the exactly balanced. So they're not taking a speculative position. They're not saying, hey, let's be a little bit longer on gasoline or diesel because we think we know something in the market. This is just regular and routine rolling through things. So how does a company start? If you're not doing this, how do you do? How do you get started on things? One of the most important parts is to develop a hedging program, a hedging policy statement ahead of time. You also want to look at doing this routinely and regularly, as that previous example showed. This is not something where you decide that, I think we should hedge now, but not later. To Jed's point, if basis is going your way, if you think the market is bullish, and you say, well, let's not hedge because I think if I buy it, it's going to go up. That's your right to do it if you wish to, but now you're at the mercy of whatever OPEC might say. You're at the mercy of whatever China might say their numbers are. I think we know what they're going to say. That'd be great, but none of us do. So what we're trying to say is let's deal with risk and take the risks you want to take But betting on fuel price is probably not what made your company grow to the size that it's at right now. So you want to be ahead of the market, not reacting to it. You want to have a hedging policy. This is very important. You want to have your rules of the road written out beforehand. You want to have everybody have a chance to weigh in on this. That's the owners, the finance side, the supply side, the marketing side. Make sure you've got understanding and buy-in from everybody, and of course, the board of directors of the company. You're doing this to establish a framework so you know what you're going to be doing ahead of time. So you're not reacting, you're not having to scramble. Hedging policy, and we've worked with companies on setting these up. Everyone's a little bit different, and that's fine. Everyone's business is a little bit different, but the underlying features of a hedging policy statement should be somewhat similar. You need to identify what your risk management objectives are. You have to know what your sources of risk are. You have to determine who's going to oversee this, who's going to be watching it. You have to determine proper limits and ways to measure things. What hedging instruments are we going to be using? Some may be appropriate in some regard and not in others. What amount are we going to hedge? Who's authorized to do so? Then we want to say, how do we limit speculation? How do we make sure we're not speculating even within our hedging program? Specifically, we're exiting our hedges when we move our physical product, and we have a plan and a procedure for that. And then determining the lines of executing the policy. Who's in charge of what? Who reports to who? How do we reconcile things? Getting our documents.
And David, Powerhouse could act kind of as a consultant, so to speak, on setting up this policy if somebody doesn't have one already.
We absolutely do. We don't even charge a consulting fee to do it. We want companies to do this the right way. We want them to understand this. Walking these things through ahead of time is absolutely critical to do. That way, supply understands what's going on, and the CFO knows what supply and marketing are doing. You want to make sure that sales and supply are well coordinated together to know what's going on here. But it opens up a lot of doors and new opportunities. And that's why that previous slide I showed with lots of regular transactions going through is because it becomes, I don't want to say turnkey, but it becomes, everyone understands what it is because you have a good policy in place. So nobody's saying what's going on over here because we've already talked about it and defined it. How do you start? We always like to say identify a competent broker, and there's a good one talking, but find out whoever you like. But we like to think we do a good job. Set up a futures account, have the board aware of everything. The best thing is we always find with people, if they haven't done this before, start small. Find a small little pilot program, a particular client, a company that you're supplying that wants to try buying this way. Do it in a small amount so you can test it and you can see how it works without it being something that really makes people, wonder, wow, that's a lot of money involved. What are we doing here? Let's do it small enough that it's not too much to upset the apple cart. Prove it out, see how it works. Do your reconciliations, find out here's our hedge gain and our hedge loss. Here's how these things work together. How do we do on our P&L with these types of supply deals? Then obviously review and revise as needed as going forward. Markets will change, competition will change, customers will change what they want. So you're always going to have a regular updating of your strategies and what you're looking to do. Then just make sure this is our job when we work with clients, is to make sure our customers and our clients are always updated on what's new and what new tools and contracts are out there that might work for them. A few years ago, there's hardly anything in propane. Now it's huge for our business. Same thing with different markets around the country. So all these things are important to do. But the biggest thing we always tell everyone is, remember, when you're looking at hedging, and to Jed, you were saying a little bit about, well, it's great when a hedge pays off. Well, your value of your physical product went down along too. So, you have to look at these two things together. Same way that if you have a hedging loss on a position, that's because you're probably making a lot more in those gallons on the physical side than you ever dreamed of. So they have to go together. The way you would determine the outcome of a hedge is looking at the cash and the physical position together. And we think it really allows companies to take the risk they want to take and grow their businesses and open new doors.
Well,
So
thank you, David. One quick
there you
question
go.
from the member in the audience asks is,
Sure.
what are the costs associated with hedging? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but commission paid to the broker plus
Sure.
the cost of the contract, et cetera.
The cost of the contract is you're not buying physical fuel through your futures positions, through your paper positions. So you have the cost of the contract. Typically, if a customer is trading, a couple hundred contracts a month, you're talking, you pay a commission when you buy a position, when you sell a position. You're going to be something in the 10 basis points type of range in terms of cost, minute compared to everything, only because we understand this is a wholesale business. But it's really, I don't want to call it frictionless, but it's a very, very small amount related to the total amount of the gallon.
Well, great information, David. Really appreciate you sharing this. And of course, you can come up with other questions. And I know David would be happy to visit with you on the after this call as well. For now, we're going to change gears over to Johnny Bertucci, and we're going to talk some, Johnny, about consignment. So really excited for this piece of the presentation. Johnny, you mind just starting by defining what consignment is for some of us who may be less familiar with the term?
Sure. Let me get my screen going here, and do this and do this. So I'm assuming you can see my screen now. Um, yeah, consignment, I guess, is really where you're providing fuel at a site, but the site itself doesn't own the fuel. You own the fuel. Um, I I was joking around with my wife because she sells consigned clothes at a store, and I think the concepts are the same. It's just the marketer buys the fuel and owns it, puts it in the ground at a site. He still owns the fuel, but is providing the site with some commission or some other means by which he can get compensated. Um, and so yeah. So anyway, uh, we've been doing some automation in the consignment area, and so I just wanted to kind of go through that a little bit today for you all. Um, Here's just a slide on who we are. We're just a software developer in the petroleum marketing space for a long time. Um, but when we're talking about consignment, um, basically, if you can automate it, you can really grow it, um, and by growing the sales without any additional labor and or almost anything. Um, we're talking about aligning systems because everybody kind of knows what's going on and is aware of pricing, aware of gallons. Again, just through automation and transparent operations, everybody's kind of can see what's going on. And then because of all of that, you can really bill seamlessly, you can draft quickly and accurately. And so I just want to kind of go through some of those paces with you. I have a couple of slides, one on advantages and one on pain points. And so for the advantages for the retailer, there's no upfront capital. All the risk is really taken by the marketer. The inventory management is simpler for the retailer. Again, transparency. And for the marketer, you can control your pricing better. You can build, stronger relationships with your dealers, your retailers. The marketer has better visibility into what's going on at the store. And this fourth one, leverage the market, kind of along with number one, the increased control over pricing. You can watch the market if you have a seasoned dispatcher or a good dispatcher who can watch the market and know what's in the ground at your sites, especially if you have multiple sites, many sites. You can really leverage the market and get fairly significant gains on buying properly and then just allowing the site to sell the product. The pain points listed here are, communication. The site needs to communicate gallons sold, from the totalizers to you, the marketer. Reconciliation needs to happen for the gallons. Of course, the marketer needs to communicate the price to the site. You need to confirm that the site's actually changing prices. That's a big pain point a lot of times. Um, Another big pain point is systems are not integrated really. You've got tank gauge systems, point of sale systems, back office accounting systems. And if they're not integrated, it makes things more complicated. And then disputes over volume of pricing. Again, if things are more transparent, all of those kind of disputes can go away. And so what I really wanted to do is just kind of take you through like an integrated solution of these different pieces, parts, to be able to, seamlessly get consigned fuel to a customer, sold and billed and collected. And so you have, in my world, three different pieces, parts. You got the pricing part, the gallons part, any adjustments you might need to make, and then the billing part. And trying to come up with a transparent, paperless system with immediate and accurate billing. So I was going to kind of go through each one of these pieces, parts, and show you how they can kind of be integrated and be automated. So I have one more slide. I got some benefits, streamlined operations, enhanced transparency, and real-time data synchronization. I mentioned all of that already. So let's talk about the prices side of things. So the prices side of things, everybody knows the cycle. The supplier provides the price, the marketer, buys the fuel, and then they'll configure a margin, freight, and taxes to the retailer, and then sends prices to the retailer. Some people, the way they kind of communicate to the retailer prices runs the gamut. If you have a back office accounting system that's sending prices, sometimes that's good. You could have a third party do it, but what's really important is to have the pricing that you're sending to the retailer captured such that you can use it in other systems. This is just an example of a price setup that is going via email or text to a customer. So you have your pricing, you do your freight, your margin, your taxes. One of the things just want to point out a little bit is when you're integrating systems, of course, a lot of the challenges are the code you use for your product, the code you use for your supplier, et cetera. And so you'll notice here that there's a product called REG mid-grade premium, but the product name is 87, 89, 93. As we go through integrations and things to be able to tie systems together, product mapping becomes important. And so you want to make sure systems have the ability to map products. And so again, this is just a example of getting pricing from the supplier to the retailer. And then what we're going to do with it, of course, is we're going to save those prices so that we can then apply it to gallons sold when we're doing the consignment billing piece of this. So the next part is gallons. Typically, all sites will have some sort of tank gauge or ATG system. You have a point of sale system at the site. The idea is to be able to automatically get those gallons to you. So like a lot of times you can do it via API. Sometimes you have an FTP site. Sometimes you'll have a third-party box like back in the day, and then TeleFuel listen-in device. There's Smart Tanks as devices. Lots of ways, but the bottom line is you need to get from the site the totalizers from the pumps so that you can know how many gallons went through the pump, because it's consigned fuel. You're you're really only paying on the gallons that went through the tank, or collecting money on the gallons that went through the pump. And so you need to know, and everybody needs to know, the site needs to know, and the marketer needs to know how many gallons went through the site. And again, you want to start storing this kind of information. And so here's again just an example of collecting totalizers from a site, open and a closing. Um, You'll notice also that we're collecting the totalizers for the dollars. That's another mechanism you can use to um, double check whether or not price changes were made appropriately, et cetera. But again, the idea is that this would happen automatically via an API or some system like that, so you can start capturing the gallons that are going through the pump. And so we got prices, that are connected. We've got gallons connected. Um, I have one of the last pieces is just adjustments, because invariably you're going to need to make some adjustments to your gallons. Examples would be a pump test or just a pure inventory adjustment. A lot of people will pull the card lock out of their consigned fuel sales. And so, again, this is just a mechanism to make adjustments. Once you're collecting the gallons, we've got prices and you've got adjustments. So now you can kind of put the pieces together to do a billing. And so I'm gonna so the billing piece of it, right? You want to automatically generate an invoice, send that invoice, that documentation to the customer. You also want to automatically actually create that invoice in your back office accounting system, in your ERP, and then go straight then to the draft. And so I have an example of what a billing documentation would look like. This is sort of a weekly billing, a 7-day billing. Again, a couple of things to point out. You'll notice, I have accounting codes and product codes. And again, those are mappings. If you're dealing with multiple systems, invariably, they're going to have different codes for the different products, and you need to tie them together. One thing you'll notice on this page as well is that I have just red invoice gallons and gallons sold for the 93 product are different. Just again to highlight that hold on, went the wrong way. There we go. Sorry about that. Highlight that the uh, totalizers coming where the invoice gallons is the totalizer. The gallons sold is coming from your point of sale system. There's a discrepancy there, and somebody needs to look at it. Probably figure out, maybe it was a pump test, maybe it was something else, but then you can make the adjustments. It's just a sort of a mechanism to ensure all the systems are in sync, or the same gallons being going through the system. At the bottom, you notice I have some pricing there for every day. Again, this is just an example of a weekly billing where they're actually averaging the price. I think most people don't do that. Most people just bill, or at least configure the billing for a daily price for the daily gallons. If you do more than that, you have a bigger opportunity to play the market. You can really watch what's going on, and make good profit when you're doing the billing a little bit more averaged. But so this is what you would show this to the as your documentation to the retailer, and then your ERP would actually generate the invoice, and then the invoice can go, and then you can draft off of that invoice. And then the so like the pieces, parts, the prices, the gallons, the adjustments, the billing, all integrated, and with the ability of everyone being able to see, because the price notification is going to the customer. Certainly the gallons is coming straight from the site to the marketer. Um, and I don't have a slide for it, but because you're collecting all the totalizers, the inventory management of the tank becomes much simpler because you can use those totalizers, those gallons, to along with your drops at the site to actually reconcile the inventory at the tank. Um, and so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Pricing, tank monitoring, billing.
Johnny, question for you. On this little diagram that you have here, prices, gallons, adjustments, and billings, is there one area where marketers tend to struggle with more than others in trying to connect this whole process?
Yeah, I think the the probably the bigger challenge is getting the gallons from the site, um, for a number of reasons. One is because you're selling consigned fuel, so you typically are not, like, you don't own the site, you don't own the convenience store, you just own the fuel that's in the ground. And so the site, if you've got 40 sites, 50 sites, invariably they all have different tank monitoring systems, different pumps, different point of sale systems, different. And so trying to manage getting that data seamlessly from that varied of a of a thing. Like if you owned all the stores, well, then you can dictate what goes in all the stores and manage easily how to get that data. But so that's one of the challenges, is getting the gallons from the site, from a variety of different HEG systems. um,
Hmm.
the prices are pretty easy to send to the customer, if you, especially if it's straightforward consignment, because you're typically just basing margin off of a rack, and so the margin off of the rack to the customer, and then most ERPs will notify the customer of that. And there's other ways. Some people just do a spreadsheet email to the customer, um, but that could also be automated very much so. Um, and then of course the challenge is merging all the data. It's like, that's like sort of my little diagram here is, your prices are usually in a different system, your gallons are in a different system. You need to get your adjustments probably connected to your gallons, and then throw those together because your ERP is not handling any of it. So throw that together and put it into your ERP to be able to do the billing and the draft.
How do we go from where we are today to this sort of integrated system that you're describing here? Is there a tool that helps? Do we need to talk with a firm? Do we have the internal knowledge to do it?
Um, it's a good question. You know, we RowLogic's been doing it sort of as a one-off for a couple of marketers, but recently we added it to our PriceWorks model, right? So, RowLogic, we have a product called PriceWorks, which is back to the first screen, if you will. um, and what we added to it is we added the ability to pull in the gallons, so that now, tried to make it agnostic. So now, however you get your gallons from your site, that can be pulled in, and now you have a more integrated piece, um, to get prices and gallons together, right? And then you can create the consignment billing report. The almost all of the ERPs, and we do this as well, and that's why, like, it's all in a sense integration. You can create an invoice in a ERP system, like push an invoice into the system. So that's kind of what we do, is we marry all of these pieces, and for, not, for lack of a better word, we, you click a button, and using the ERP's API system, we create all the invoices in the API. And that's why we kind of say, it's like, if you can automate this, like, it doesn't take, like, if you've got, say, one clerk kind of managing your billing, your consignment sites, if you've got 10 sites and then you had 20 sites or 50 sites or 100 sites, pretty soon the clerk is not going to be able to manage all of that. But if it's all automated like this, one clerk can handle 1,000 sites, because it's all it's like managed by exception. If the prices are going out, the gallons are coming in, you create the button. I can create 1,000 invoices in an ERP system by the push of a button if I have all the information.
Mm-hmm. Good information, Johnny. Really appreciate you sharing that. Again, for the audience, these slides will be shared out. One question did come in while Johnny was talking, but actually had to do with David. I thought I would ask that for the audience here before we close. But one member just asked, David, can you talk a little bit how you advise clients to handle rolling hedges on unsold inventory when the futures contracts expire?
That's one of the biggest challenges as we go through. Obviously, it would be wonderful if you're running, gallons in a terminal that you've finished, moved every last gallon right before the end of the month, but it almost never works out that way, and probably can't because you need to stay wet in your position. We monitor those spreads between the contract months on a daily basis. Every company is going to be slightly different in terms of their risk appetite for when they want to roll. There are hedging instruments actually that are coming into use. They did a lot more so, especially when we've had high periods of high volatility that are in essence almost like an insurance policy of the spread between one contract month to the next. They're called calendar spread options. They started being used in a fair amount in diesel, not so much in gasoline, but in diesel. But we can look at that. We chart it historically where that difference in the basis, the difference between the first and second month has been. So we can give you historical information, say, hey, for this month of the year, the roll between diesel has looked in these high water marks and low water marks to give you an idea of where you are and when you may want to roll to make your decisions. So it's a combination of data and review on a regular basis and deploying hedge tools as they might be useful.
Sounds really good. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you guys being on the call today and helping educate us about this. Again, for the audience, we'll send out this recording to you as well as the slide decks. It'll have Johnny's information, David's information. If you have further questions you want for them, please feel free to follow up with them. I know they'll be very happy to talk and just have conversations with you. So really appreciate the time and knowledge, David and Johnny, that you brought to this session. And before the audience goes, I'd like just to remind you to check out our SG Voices website for more valuable content. We have articles on there, webinars, other industry-specific resources available to you. You can also stay updated on all of our upcoming events that we're going to have. Our next webinar is going to be August 7th with the Alera Group, and then August 14th with McClaskey Excellent Institute. So we'd love to see you there for those. Go ahead and mark those on your calendar. Lastly, we want to hear from you. So take a moment to complete a short survey that's going to come out immediately after this. It's just a couple questions as you sign off. And your feedback's valuable. We always want to improve our content and make it as meaningful and impactful to you as possible. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy summer. Hope you can get out this weekend and do something active. I'm going to be riding in the Tour de Whatcom this weekend on my bicycle, 100-kilometer race. So if you don't see me after this weekend, I was on the side of the road, left for dead. But anyway, I'm looking forward to summertime up here in the Pacific Northwest. So again, thank you guys. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you all.